Just before Christmas, I overheard my parents and sister planning to use my money without me. Played dumb. Christmas night came with no candles, no turkey, only humiliation. Meanwhile, I shared photos from my $3 million villa, hosting my own extravagant party. Mom called me 120 times. About a week before Christmas, I accidentally caught my parents and my sister talking about ways to use my money without ever looping me in. And instead of confronting them, I acted like I hadn't heard a thing. When Christmas night rolled around, there were no candles, no turkey, no warmth at all, just a quiet kind of embarrassment hanging in the air. While at the same time I was posting photos online from my $3 million villa, where I was throwing myself a blowout party of my own. My mom called me 120 times that night. Back then, the heating vent in my old bedroom worked like a confession booth, carrying every word straight to me. On December 18th, exactly 7 days before Christmas, I was stretched out on the floor of what used to be my childhood room during a short visit home, my ear pressed flat against the cold metal grate. Down in the kitchen, my family sat around the table, calmly talking through plans that were about to blow apart everything I believed about loyalty and love. "He won't even notice if we borrow 50 grand, my sister Claire said, her voice dripping with the same entitled tone I'd heard my whole life. Claire, my older sister, had always been good at explaining away bad behavior. The trust fund Dad set up for him just sits there earning interest, and meanwhile Mark and I are buried in debt from fixing up the house after the wedding. My mother, Helen, replied instantly, without even pausing to think. Jack has more money than he could ever spend. Between Grandma's inheritance, the life insurance payout, and his salary at the firm, he's swimming in cash while we're struggling just to keep the heat on." When they said the accident, they were talking about the car crash 3 years earlier that killed my fiancée, Emily. The settlement money had been sizable, sure, but hearing my own mother refer to it so casually, like my grief came with a price tag and an expiration date, sent a cold shock straight through me. My father, Robert, cleared his throat and added, "Helen mentioned Jack's been looking into investment properties. If he's got money to throw at real estate, he can help his own family first. Blood comes before everything." "Exactly," Claire said, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "And we already told everyone we're hosting Christmas dinner at the country club this year. Those deposits are non-refundable. Jack can cover it as his contribution. He doesn't even have kids to buy presents for." That last line knocked the wind out of me. Claire knew better than anyone that Emily and I had been trying to start a family before the crash. She was the one I'd trusted with details about fertility treatments, our hopes, and the future we were planning. "So how much do we need altogether?" my dad asked. $75,000 should do it," Claire answered. "That covers the country club dinner, my kitchen remodel, and enough to get Mom and Dad caught up on the mortgage they've been hiding." My mother gasped and said, "How did you know about that?" Claire replied, "I saw the bank letters when I was here last month. You're 3 months behind. Jack's sitting on nearly $2 million all told, and you're about to lose the house." What followed was a heavy, suffocating silence. No one objected. No one suggested asking me directly or wondered out loud if any of this was wrong. They just moved on to figuring out details, like thieves calmly splitting stolen goods. I finally pulled myself away from the vent, my hands shaking with a kind of rage so intense it felt almost spiritual. These were the people who raised me, cheered for me, and held me together at Emily's funeral, and now they saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a familiar face. The next morning I walked downstairs wearing my biggest smile, balancing coffee and pastries from the bakery Claire loved. "I figured we could have a nice breakfast before I head back to the city," I said as I sat down at the kitchen table. I hadn't slept at all, spending the night staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction I'd had with them over the past 3 years. How many times had Claire casually asked about my investments? How often had my mom nudged conversations toward real estate or money management? Even my dad's recent questions about trust structures suddenly felt dark and calculated. They'd been quietly mapping out my entire financial life, and realizing that made me feel violated in a way that went far beyond simple betrayal. These weren't strangers trying to scam me. These were the same people who held my hand while I buried the woman I loved and promised they'd always have my back. The truth was they hadn't been there for me at all. They'd just been nearby, circling like sharks once they smelled blood. My mother smiled at me, warm and sweet, and the contrast between that face and the plotting I'd heard the night before made my stomach twist. "You're so thoughtful, honey," she said. "We were just talking about Christmas plans." I poured coffee into the fine china, acting perfectly innocent. Claire launched into a polished speech about the country club, the menu, and the decorations. "It's pricey," she said, "but it's worth it for the family to have something special. We were hoping you might want to chip in, considering how well you're doing." "How much were you thinking?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Maybe 20,000, Claire said, suddenly lowballing the number compared to what I'd overheard. "We can split the rest and keep it fair." I took a slow sip of coffee like I was really thinking it over. "That sounds reasonable," I said, then added, "Actually, there's something I wanted to tell you all." 3 sets of eyes locked onto me instantly. "I'm going away for Christmas," I said. "A friend from law school invited me to Aspen, and I'm leaving on the 23rd. The room seemed to drop 20 degrees. My mom's smile stiffened into something fragile. "But we always spend Christmas together," she said. "It's tradition." "I know," I replied calmly, "but I need something different this year. The holidays have been rough since Emily died, and being somewhere new might help." I said it sincerely, all while watching them scramble in silence as their carefully laid plans started to fall apart. Claire was the first to regroup, her voice sliding into that soft, coaxing tone she used when she wanted something. She said she understood, truly, but reminded me that family should stick together, especially with such a beautiful celebration already planned, and asked if I could push the Aspen trip to another time. I told her smoothly that I was already committed, a clean lie delivered without effort, but added that I still wanted to help with the country club dinner and would think about the amount and get back to them. I left later that afternoon, driving back toward my city apartment while their disappointed objections echoed behind me. They called twice before I even reached the highway, my mother Helen pleading softly and Claire barely hiding her irritation, and I ignored every call, letting them sink into voicemail. The road unspooled ahead of me in a long ribbon of gray asphalt swallowed by winter fog, and with every mile I put between myself and that house, I felt like I was slowly waking up from a bad dream, except the dream was real and the people in it were my own family. I squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, anger and grief battling it out in my chest. Part of me wanted to turn around, march back inside, and confront them with every word I'd overheard, to watch their faces as I repeated their exact sentences and force them into excuses and fake apologies. But another part of me, the part that survived losing Emily and rebuilt a life from rubble, knew that confronting them head-on would only give them room to twist the truth and manipulate the situation. It was better to let them believe I was clueless, better to let them keep scheming, while I quietly prepared something they'd never anticipate. When I walked into my apartment that evening, it felt different somehow. The place I'd carefully put together, filled with artwork Emily and I had collected and furniture we'd picked out during happier years, no longer felt like a refuge and instead felt like a memorial to everything I'd lost, not just her, but the family I thought I belonged to. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one across the skyline, imagining other families sitting down to dinner, talking about their days, making plans for the holidays. Maybe some of them were real, genuinely loving each other without strings attached, or maybe everyone was lying to one another and I'd just been foolish enough to believe in something pure. My phone buzzed again with a call from Claire, and I silenced it without a second thought and opened my laptop instead. Over the next 3 days, I carried out my plan with the same precision that had helped make me one of the youngest senior associates at my firm. First, I called my financial advisor, Paul Reynolds, and asked him to move most of my liquid assets into accounts that no one in my family could touch. Then I contacted my attorney, Scott Adler, and had him draft a formal notice stating that any attempt to access my trust or other accounts without my written permission would trigger criminal charges. Paul had been managing my investments since Emily died, guiding me through the flood of insurance and settlement money without ever prying or making me feel guilty about what I did with it, and when I explained what I needed without offering reasons, he simply said it would be handled and had everything reorganized within 48 hours. Scott was just as direct. He'd helped settle Emily's estate and set up the trust my grandmother left me, and when he asked if I was expecting unauthorized access, I told him I was just being cautious, which wasn't entirely untrue, and he agreed it was smart and promised the letters would be sent to every relevant institution by the next business day. Those steps were just defensive, though, and what I had planned for Christmas called for something more imaginative. Through a colleague named Lauren Price, whose family owned several high-end properties, I secured a breathtaking villa in wine country, only 2 hours from the city. The rental cost more than many people earned in half a year, but it came fully staffed, beautifully decorated, and available on Christmas Day. I invited 12 people, close friends from law school, co-workers from the firm who would otherwise be alone, and 2 former foster kids from a mentorship program I've been quietly funding for years. Lauren had mentioned the property offhand during a casual chat about holiday plans, explaining that her family specialized in luxury rentals for clients who wanted privacy without owning, and when I called, she told me Meadowbrook Estate was unexpectedly open, a 15-acre flagship property with staff and space for 20 guests, freed up by a last-minute cancellation after a tech executive's divorce was finalized and his ex-wife walked away with the reservation. The irony wasn't lost on me, one family falling apart so I could celebrate connections I chose for myself, and I told her I'd take it with the full-service package, chef, housekeeping, concierge, everything without hesitating when she named the price. Deciding who to invite took more care than booking the place, and I sat at my dining table with a legal pad, writing names, crossing them out, and thinking hard about who truly deserved to share that day with me. Aaron Cole was the first name I wrote down, no question about it, since we'd survived our brutal first year of law school together, bonded by exhaustion and constant self-doubt, and after she lost her parents in a house fire at 16, she worked herself to the bone through school on scholarships, loans, and non-stop jobs. After I came into money following Emily's death, I quietly paid off Aaron's student loans, and when she found out, she cried for an hour straight. Another name followed close behind, David Harper, a senior partner at the firm who'd quietly guided me through the darkest stretch of my life after the accident, never pushing, just steady and present when I needed it most. His wife had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier, and his grown kids lived overseas, so he spent every holiday by himself, always insisting that he preferred it that way, even though I'd seen the quiet loneliness in his eyes at office Christmas parties. The 2 foster kids from my mentorship program, Kayla and Ryan, were both in their early 20s now, trying to figure out adulthood without the safety net most people never even think about. Kayla was finishing nursing school while working overnight shifts at a hospital, and Ryan had just landed an electrician apprenticeship after years of scraping by on minimum wage jobs. Both of them had aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but grit, stubborn determination, and a refusal to quit. I added coworkers who had turned into real friends, people who showed up for me during Emily's funeral, and the brutal months that followed. Aaron Cole, who covered my cases when grief made me barely functional. Daniel Park, who sat silently in my office while I cried instead of going to a deposition. Rachel Kim, who brought me soup every day for 3 straight weeks because she noticed I'd stopped eating. Then there were others from the firm, associates and paralegals who'd slowly become part of my extended circle, people whose company I genuinely enjoyed without obligation, guilt, or expectation. The invitations went out on thick, elegant cardstock, hand-delivered by courier reading, "You are cordially invited to an intimate Christmas celebration at Meadowbrook Estate. Formal attire. Transportation provided. Please join me in creating new traditions and celebrating the family we choose." Every single person said yes. At the same time, my mother's calls became more frequent, and Claire's text messages shifted from casual check-ins to thinly veiled demands. My father left a voicemail explaining they'd already put the country club deposit on a credit card they couldn't really afford, assuming I'd reimburse them. I didn't respond to any of it. On December 22nd, I sent a group text to my parents and Claire saying I hoped their Christmas celebration went beautifully, that I was sorry I couldn't be there, and that I was sure the country club dinner would be lovely. Claire called immediately, and I declined the call and silenced my phone. On Christmas Eve, I drove out to the villa with my trunk packed full of carefully chosen gifts for each guest. The property blew past even my high expectations. Sitting on 15 acres of rolling hills, the main house had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking frost-dusted vineyards. Inside, professional decorators had transformed the place into something straight out of a luxury magazine. A 12-foot Christmas tree filled the great room, covered in crystal ornaments and soft white lights that scattered rainbows across the marble floors. The drive through wine country had been calm and quiet, the landscape stripped down to winter essentials. Bare vines lined up in perfect rows across gentle slopes, stark and beautiful in their simplicity. The sky hung low and gray, threatening snow that probably wouldn't come but set the mood anyway. When I turned onto the private drive leading to Meadowbrook Estate, my breath caught because the photos Lauren had shown me hadn't come close to capturing it. The main house rose 3 stories, all stone and glass, somehow grand without feeling cold, while smaller guest cottages dotted the grounds and connected by stone paths lined with neatly trimmed hedges. Gardens that would explode with color in spring rested quietly now, mulched and tucked in for winter. I parked in the circular drive and stood there for a moment, just taking it all in, realizing this place was mine for the next 3 days, not because I'd been born into it or married into it, but because I'd worked for it, survived loss, and built a life that let me create moments like this. Before I could reach the door, it opened, and a woman in her 50s dressed warmly but professionally smiled and introduced herself as Diane Carlson, the property manager, welcoming me inside from the cold. The interior lived up to every promise the exterior made, with soaring ceilings, exposed beams, furniture that looked antique but felt inviting, and original artwork instead of generic prints. Fresh flowers filled every room, their scent mixing with wood smoke from the massive stone fireplace. Diane told me the master suite was ready, that the chef, Michel Laurent, had arrived earlier that morning and already started preparing for Christmas dinner, and that the rest of the staff would arrive at 7 the next day, asking if I needed anything before the full tour. I told her to just point me to coffee, saying I'd explore on my own, and she led me to a kitchen that would have made any chef jealous before quietly disappearing. I poured myself coffee from a French press already waiting, the beans freshly ground and perfect, and as I stood at the kitchen window looking out over vineyards and hills that seemed to stretch forever, something unfamiliar settled in my chest, real peace, the kind I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Claire again, and I silenced it without even checking. The chef was already planning a feast for the next day: herb-crusted prime rib, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta, fresh lobster bisque, and desserts that mixed tradition with creativity, while the wine cellar was stocked with bottles that cost more than my family's country club deposit. My guests began arriving Christmas morning, their faces lighting up as they took in the property, and when Erin saw the massive digital display I'd set up in the dining room, rotating photos from years of shared dinners, study sessions, and genuine moments together, she actually cried. She hugged me tight and whispered that she couldn't believe I'd done all this, and in that moment I knew I'd made the right choice. We all deserve to feel cherished, I told her quietly, especially by the people who actually show up for us. And by noon the villa was alive with laughter, overlapping conversations, and the easy noise of people who felt safe together. We traded gifts beside the massive fireplace, played ridiculous party games until everyone was crying from laughing too hard, and raised flutes of champagne that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Throughout the day, I posted photos to social media, carefully chosen shots of the elegant table settings, the unbelievable food, and candid moments of my guests looking genuinely happy. Every post intentional, every caption centered on gratitude, chosen family, and new beginnings, with the villa's name and location clearly tagged so nothing about it was subtle. The whole thing screamed celebration, wealth, and deliberate exclusion. I turned my phone back on around 2 in the afternoon, and it immediately started vibrating, first Claire, then my mother Helen, then my father Robert, and I let every call roll straight to voicemail while I carved the prime rib and served a meal that could have fed 40 people. The voicemails followed a predictable arc, starting confused and apologetic, shifting to angry accusations, and finally collapsing into desperate begging. By 6 o'clock, my mother had called 89 times, and I checked the voicemail counter during dessert, showing it to Erin, who lifted her champagne glass in a dry little salute and said, "To families who see us as people, not piggy banks," and everyone drank to that. The text messages filled in the rest of the story, with Claire explaining that she'd arrived at the country club in a dress she'd bought just for photos, only to learn they'd misunderstood the deposit, that what they paid only held the space and the full dinner had to be paid up front, and when they couldn't come up with $75,000, the club refused to serve them. "We're sitting in the parking lot," she texted. "Mom is crying. Dad won't stop trying to call you. How could you abandon us like this on Christmas?" 20 minutes later another message came through saying she'd seen my Instagram, that I was partying in a mansion while they were humiliated and hungry, and asking what kind of person I really was. I poured myself another glass of wine and posted a photo of the chocolate soufflé as it was served, the center perfectly molten, with a caption that read, Grateful for friends who feel like family. Blessed beyond measure. My mother's 97th voicemail came in around 7:30, her voice cracked and shaking as she begged me to help, telling me they were sitting in a parking lot on Christmas, that my sister was devastated, that my father wouldn't even look at her, and asking how I could let this happen to my own family, and I deleted it before she finished speaking. By the time my guests left the next morning, pleasantly exhausted after staying up talking and laughing until 3 a.m., my mother had called 120 times, the texts were in the hundreds, my father's voicemail swung wildly between commanding demands and broken apologies, and Claire had apparently told half the extended family her version of events, triggering a flood of messages from cousins and aunts I barely knew, all accusing me of selfishness. The morning itself was full of long goodbyes and gratitude, Erin hugging me hard enough to crack ribs as she whispered that I'd given her the first real Christmas she'd had since her parents died, and James Mitchell, usually so composed, shaking my hand with tears in his eyes as he told me his wife used to create celebrations like this and he'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something joyful instead of just enduring the season. Kayla and Ryan lingered after everyone else had climbed into the cars I'd arranged, Kayla clutching the nursing textbooks I'd wrapped for her and saying no one had ever done anything like this for them, admitting they didn't even realize people could be generous without wanting something in return, a comment that hit harder than she probably meant it to. My own family had taught me that same lesson from the opposite angle, that generosity could hide manipulation and kindness could come with a price, and I told them sometimes generosity really is just generosity, and to remember that when they were in positions to help others someday. After the last car disappeared down the drive, I walked through the villa in silence while the staff quietly began restoring the space, and Diane found me standing in the great room staring at the towering tree and asked if the celebration had been a success. I told her honestly it was the best Christmas I'd ever had, and she said she'd managed the property for 8 years and seen everything from million-dollar weddings to celebrity hideaways, but the best gatherings were always the ones where people genuinely cared about each other instead of just performing care. I spent December 26th at the villa enjoying the quiet, sitting on the terrace wrapped in a cashmere blanket while the chef made a light brunch and I read the messages that kept pouring in, until one from Claire finally caught my eye, accusing me of planning revenge, calling me cruel and vindictive, and saying I'd destroyed my family over one conversation. I replied for the first time in more than a week, keeping it short and precise, telling her I wasn't destroying anything, just refusing to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford while they plotted to steal from me behind my back, and wishing her a Merry Christmas. Her response came immediately, insisting they weren't stealing, that they were family, and that family helps each other. Family respects each other, I typed back. Family asks instead of plotting behind someone's back. Family doesn't turn another person's grief into a dollar figure or treat loss like a handy revenue stream. The 3 dots showing she was typing popped up, vanished, then appeared again before she finally sent a message saying Mom and Dad were going to lose the house. Then they should have come to me and asked for help instead of planning to take it without permission, I replied. I would have helped with the mortgage. I would have chipped in for a reasonable Christmas celebration. I would have done almost anything if you'd been honest with me from the start. But you weren't. You didn't see me as a person worth respecting, just a resource to be exploited. That message went unanswered. I set my phone face down and went inside to pack. The drive back to the city felt unlike any trip I'd taken before. Lighter somehow, even with the weight of everything I'd just done. I'd cut ties with careful precision, removing the parts of my life that had turned toxic while pretending to be love. When I walked into my apartment, the familiar quiet greeted me. I'd moved there after Emily died, unable to stay in the place we'd shared, and the space reflected that chapter of my life. Polished, expensive, and deeply empty of the mess and noise that come with real family. But maybe that was all right. Maybe family wasn't meant to be obligation and guilt wrapped in nostalgia. Maybe family was what I'd created at the villa, people who showed up because they wanted to, who celebrated your happiness instead of calculating your value, who saw your humanity before your bank balance. My mom called again on December 27th, and this time I answered, my voice calm and even. Jack, thank God, she said, we need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about, I told her. I know you were planning to take my money without asking. I know you see me as a solution to your financial problems instead of as your son. I know Claire has been feeding you details about my finances and pushing you to help yourselves. The silence stretched, broken only by her shallow breathing. We wouldn't have taken anything, she finally said, her voice small. We were just talking, thinking out loud in case you offered. You were discussing exact amounts and ways to access accounts, I said. That isn't hypothetical. That's premeditated theft. You're being dramatic, she snapped. Am I? Because the mortgage trouble is real. The country club deposit you couldn't afford is real. The expectation that I'd hand over $75,000 without question is real. The only thing that isn't real is this family bond you're claiming obligates me to pay for your mistakes. She started crying then, the kind of crying meant to pull guilt out of me, and once it would have worked. We raised you, she said. We fed you, clothed you, put you through school. You did what parents are supposed to do, I replied, not angry, not sad, just stating facts. And I'm grateful for that. But gratitude doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean letting myself be used or manipulated. It doesn't mean pretending I didn't hear you turn my dead fiancé into an insurance payout. Her crying stopped cold. You heard everything, she said. Every word. Yes, I said. And you've been planning this revenge ever since, she accused. The villa, the party, humiliating us in public. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. The villa was a celebration with people who actually care about me. The posts were just proof of that. If you felt humiliated, that came from your own choices and expectations, not my desire for revenge. So what do you want from us, she asked, her voice hard now. What will it take for you to help? That question told me everything. Even now, she framed this as a money negotiation, not a broken relationship. I want you to sell the house, I said. Downsize to something you can actually afford. I want Claire and Greg to stop living beyond their means and expecting bailouts. And I want all of you to understand that my money is mine, earned and inherited through my own life. Not a shared family account you can tap whenever you feel like it. So you're just going to let us lose everything, she said. You're going to lose what you can't afford to keep, I replied. That's not cruelty, that's reality. I'll help you find a good realtor. I'll even help with moving costs if you come to me honestly and respectfully. But I won't bankroll a fantasy lifestyle you didn't earn. She hung up without another word. An hour later, Claire called, her voice shaking with rage. You've destroyed everything, she yelled. Mom won't stop crying. Dad locked himself in his office. The whole family thinks you're a monster. They can think whatever they want, I said calmly. Their opinions don't change the facts. We needed that money. We were counting on you. Then you should have asked instead of schemed. You should have respected me instead of turning me into a dollar sign. You should have treated me like family instead of a mark. We did treat you like family, she shot back. Family means mutual respect, I interrupted. Family means honesty. Family means not sitting around discussing how to spend someone's inheritance from their grandmother and the settlement from their fiancé's death like it's community property. If you want to know what family means to me now, it's the friends who showed up at that villa expecting nothing but time together. It's the people who ask how I'm doing without calculating what they might get from the answer. Her voice softened, almost pleading. I'm sorry we talked about it without you. I'm sorry we assumed. But you're really going to cut us off over one conversation. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm setting boundaries. If you can respect those boundaries, maybe we can build something new from there. If you can't do that, then we'll keep our distance, I wrote back, and either way I'm done being the family bank, and after that message she hung up too. January brought changes I hadn't expected to see so quickly. My parents put their house on the market at a price that matched reality instead of wishful thinking. Claire started posting online about downsizing and simplifying her life, framing it like a mindful choice instead of the consequence it really was. My dad emailed me asking if I knew any solid financial advisors who could help them reorganize their debt, and I replied in a strictly professional tone, giving him 3 names and offering to cover the cost of the first consultation. He thanked me politely and didn't mention Christmas, the country club, or any of the damage that had led us there. In February, Erin called to invite me to her birthday dinner, and she told me that the Christmas celebration had changed something in her, that it reminded her what connection was supposed to feel like, and I told her it had reminded me too. In March, my mother sent a card with a short note saying they were settling into a smaller place, that it was actually nice not having so much space to manage, that my father was working with the advisor I'd recommended, and that she hoped I was doing well with no apology and no acknowledgement of what she'd done or planned, just polite updates and distance, and I didn't respond. Claire reached out in April and asked if we could meet for coffee, and I agreed, picking a neutral place halfway between us. She looked worn down in a real way, not the dramatic kind she'd always leaned on. She told me she and Greg had separated, that the money issues were just symptoms of deeper problems, and that they'd both married for the wrong reasons, and when she said she was sorry, I believed she meant it. Then she asked if I was happy watching everything fall apart, and I told her calmly that I wasn't happy about her pain, but I also wasn't responsible for it, that all of them had made choices and I'd simply stopped enabling those choices. She stirred her coffee without drinking it and said I'd always been the strong one, that even as kids I never seemed to need anyone the way the rest of them did, and I corrected her quietly, telling her I'd needed her, needed a sister who would support me through grief instead of calculating the value of my loss, needed parents who asked how I was coping instead of seeing tragedy as opportunity, needed a family who saw me as a person. She looked down at the table, and I told her that she was right about one thing, that I didn't need that anymore because I'd built something else. She called it the chosen family thing, and I confirmed that it was. She finally looked at me and said she was truly sorry for what they'd said and planned, that I deserved better, and I told her it mattered even if it didn't fix anything. We left without promises or plans to rebuild, just an honest recognition that the damage was real and maybe permanent. When Christmas came again, I rented a different villa and invited 20 people, including Aaron, several co-workers, more ments, and 2 distant cousins I'd reconnected with who had their own complicated histories with our family. Claire sent me a card that year saying she hoped my celebration was beautiful, that I deserved it, and that maybe someday we'd find our way back to each other, but she understood if we didn't, thanking me for teaching her that love without respect is just manipulation in a nicer disguise, and I kept that card. My parents sent nothing, which said plenty on its own. The villa filled with warmth and laughter and people who chose to be there. People who celebrated me instead of my portfolio. We ate incredible food, exchanged thoughtful gifts, and toasted to families we built rather than inherited. Someone asked if I missed my original family during the holidays, and after thinking about it, I said that missing them had been a story I once told myself because the truth hurt too much. And now I didn't have to miss anything because I had exactly what I needed right there. It wasn't completely true because some small part of me still ached for the version of my mother who would choose me over money, the sister who would protect instead of exploit, the father who would parent instead of calculate, but that ache had faded into a manageable scar instead of an open wound. The people in that room represented something far more valuable than the family I'd been assigned, because they were chosen, respectful, and genuinely affectionate, seeing me as whole instead of something to be assessed and used. My phone didn't ring once that Christmas, and my mother had finally stopped calling. I posted a single photo of us all around the fireplace, smiling, glasses raised, and captioned it simply, "Home is where they choose you back," and 300 people liked it, including Claire. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that's how some families end and others begin, not with dramatic scenes or tearful reunions, but with quiet acceptance that old patterns are done and new ones might form, or maybe not. And maybe my parents and Claire would stay distant figures forever. People I once loved who couldn't love me the way I needed. Either way, I stopped waiting for them to change, stopped hoping for sudden self-awareness or remorse, stopped tying my worth to their approval. The heating vent that carried their voices had also given me clarity, showing me who they were when they thought I couldn't hear. A kind of honesty most people never get, and I used it to free myself. Driving back to the city after that second Christmas, I thought about Emily and knew she would have understood, because she was always better at boundaries than I was, better at seeing when someone's presence costs more than their absence, and she once told me I deserved people who show up for me, not people who show up to me, and my family had only ever shown up to me, hands out, expectations ready, convinced my success, inheritance, and grief belonged to them because we shared blood, and they were wrong. The money was mine. The grief was mine. The choice of who I shared my life with was mine, and I'd finally made it.